Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have visual artist Stephanie Gonzalez with me. She's an artist based in Houston who does incredible abstract, kind of geometric, very spiritual, metaphysical paintings. I think y'all are going to love, so you definitely got to check out her work. But we had an amazingly deep, personal, vulnerable conversation today about just life itself in relation to consciousness, spiritual practice, and how we sort of navigate the very confusing landscape that this world has become for many of us. Stephanie shared a lot about her personal story growing up in Mexico, how she kind of got into creating art through exposures to Bob Ross, which her grandfather loved watching as a child, but just how she's always been very in touch with her creative side, and then how that's sort of evolved over time to get her to where she is today. She got her MFA at a university in Houston and shared a little bit about her experience there and how that really opened a lot for her. And it was just a really rich conversation. I think she really expressed a lot of ideas I think we're all thinking about in terms of how do we sort of be in this world in a way that keeps us connected to sort of our deeper sense of self and yet still connected to the greater community around us. She posed a lot of great questions and has lots of great insight. And we just had a really beautiful, authentic exchange with each other that I think all of you are going to get a lot out of, because I think these are some of the questions most people probably are asking or thinking about from time to time. And so I know you're going to enjoy it. So, tune in and enjoy here, Stephanie Gonzalez. Peace, y'all. Hey, y'all, I'm going to cut in here real quick for all my YouTube viewers out there, just to remind you that the podcast also exists on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and any major podcast platform. So if you're enjoying what you're seeing here on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe on one of those platforms as well, so you can take the show with you on the go and never really miss an episode. Also, I wanted to let you know that I'm now offering subscriptions on my Instagram page at Martin L. Benson for 99 cents a month. That's less than $12 a year, which that funding will go toward helping produce the show. So I can continue to evolve the podcast, continue to create great content. So if you support what I'm doing here and are enjoying all this content here on YouTube, consider not only subscribing on the podcast platforms, but also subscribing on Instagram for that 99 cents a month so that I can continue on this path. So thank you all. Now back to the show. Peace. All right, Stephanie, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I started off with a little bit of moving my body, a little bit of yoga, and
nice.
Yeah, how about you?
Doing good. I mean, that's the best way to start the day. I start my day that way 99% of the time. It's just the way to start, on that connected space. And for you and me being here together, I'm just super excited. It took us a while to kind of find the right time to connect on the podcast. And I can't recall exactly where I came across your work, but I just was really drawn into not only like the quality of the images you're making, but you have a very dynamic practice as an artist. You do a lot of things outside of just painting and drawing, with like the installations, the light sculpture pieces that I've seen on your website and stuff. And it seems like you're just a very dynamic, creative being. And I just felt drawn to like what you were doing. And I'm super grateful that you're willing to be here with me today on the podcast. And so I thought a cool way for us to start, since we don't really know each other, is to learn a little bit more about you and your background, sort of like your own journey and how you got to sort of where you are today and doing the kind of work that you're doing. If you want to just kind of share a little bit of that part of your life with us.
Yeah, I love your work, by the way. Also, I found you on Instagram and I immediately started following you because your work spoke to me. I just actually these past 2 years started working in this style. I started off creating out of necessity. I grew up in Mexico, and I felt a lot of, I just maybe didn't know how to express myself and what was happening at home. There was a lot of just a lot of things that I dealt with, a lot of trauma. My mom being kind of single mom, meeting someone else who just was not great, and not having, I kind of realized this year I'm kind of like an internalizer. And so I I didn't know how to express that, and it was just like a weird place to be. So I just kind of found peace in painting. And I started painting because Bob Ross, really, my grandfather he's retired. He's left us now, but he's a retired, and so in the summers when all the kids were out on vacations, we really couldn't afford it. So my mom would kind of drop us off there with my grandparents in Mexico and just kind of go to work. And he would watch Bob Ross. My grandpa would watch Bob Ross at like 5 a.m. It's like he's sitting here half deaf, so like he just be blasting Bob Ross. And I just remember kind of picking that up, and starting off with landscapes, and then kind of playing with the idea of abstraction, and started kind of doing abstraction without really having any knowledge of abstraction itself, and the movement and all that. I think it all kind of just came to me in a time when I needed it, and it's changed so much. At the time, I was creating, like I said, out of necessity, and a lot of the work, you can tell in the mark making and the choice of color, that it was purely based on intuition and kind of like frustration, and I had a lot of anger too, like being a gay kind of kid and not knowing where I fall. I kind of felt like I never fit in anywhere, because we did move to Texas when I was about 13. And so there was a lot of that. There was a lot of like me being stuck in this kind of like negative place, not knowing where I belong. And I think it was through, I went to go get my master's at of all places, like a Baptist university. And I was terrified because I didn't know, how I was gonna fit. And, I learned a lot there. It was through that kind of place that I found so much love and acceptance, in it, just in a place I wouldn't expect it.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
yeah, after going there, the way that they approached that school was a lot of kind of like almost like family. It was more of, they celebrated your individuality as an artist, but they also, it was the most giving experience. And I came in there kind of kicking and screaming, and like, it was a beautiful experience where I was embraced by love in so many ways, and also at the same time learned about the different art movements. And I didn't have knowledge of the art movements. I didn't grow up in a place where I could have art classes or anything like that. And so once I decided to, okay, let me try this master's thing, and just kind of hone in on my craft, that's when it kind of started changing. I started learning about different artists, and I didn't learn about spirituality until later, and kind of like the spiritual work, like Hilma Klimt, for example, I've been informed about just through creating these works. Somebody was like, do you know who this person is? And I didn't, and then I researched. But it all kind of started with the romantics, like the romantic period, like David Friedrich, like he was doing these paintings of like contemplation, where it was a lot of landscape. And there's this one particular painting, I forget the name, where he's standing like on some sort of like rock ledge, and there's the sea just like in front of him, and it's kind of dark. And I think that kind of sparked something where I realized, oh, let me change. And it just kind of happened. It was just, I started learning about the power of your thoughts, and just kind of started playing around with that, playing around with perspective, and started understanding that kind of the power of the mind, really.
Yeah.
And I started just kind of finding peace in that. And then I continued to explore it more, and then just started meditating. And it's through the meditation that all of these symbols and that's where the work really changed, is through
Wow.
meditation and finding grace and that, and focusing on not so much on the plane here, the 3D plane, but kind of knowing that there's another plane and accessing that through sitting with self and just kind of honing that, but yeah, I shifted from abstraction, and for a while I was really into the female form, so I was doing a lot of photography, mixed media,
Mm.
and um but I somehow always had something organic. Like there was always organic and kind of celebrating imperfection, and
Hmm.
I feel like I'm trying to now continue to do that in this work that I'm doing now. It's a lot more spiritual. It's like when I first started, I was like, man, I don't know if anybody's gonna understand these or if they even make sense, but I didn't care because they made sense to me. And I've had people tell me, "Oh, I like your abstract style," or "Why don't you do this?" And it's like, well, I'm not angry anymore. So like I'm not like worried about this narrative of like, I think for a while I was kind of trying to kind of be a part of these organizations and have, be a part of the community by having some sort of social commentary about the things that have happened to me. And I feel like there's kind of like a trend in like galleries, or it's almost like they want you to kind of be the immigrant or be the queer artist who struggled not fitting in, and just like all these things that, sure, those things happen to me, but my work, I no longer want to focus on that. And
Mm.
I kind of felt like I don't fit in the art world right now, because I just feel like if I'm trying to apply for certain things, I've realized that like a lot of the narrative has to be around attaching to all of these other things, right? And so I feel like right now I'm kind of floating around trying to figure out how I fit into the community, because I'm also being so like these works require so much solitude. And so
Hmm.
I'm trying to find balance between that. Also, when you start to kind of understand just the power of meditation and just kind of that peace that you could find within yourself without external substances, um yeah, you kind of want to like bring everyone in, and then you're kind of cuckoo. You're kind of, because it's like some people don't, then you become like the annoying positive person who is
Mm.
like, I don't want to hear about your positivity and how this was a lesson. I just want to, forgive my language, bitch about something. And when
Mm.
you become a person that's like, but don't you see, like this has happened to you, time will show you, and just you get to a state of mind where you're so at peace, and then you also have to be in the world. And so
Yes.
it's so strange, because it's like you have to have balance. and
Hmm.
and so yeah, I feel like we just went on like a time, like
Oh
a
no, it's amazing. I love everything that you're sharing. Like I'm just like saying to myself internally, yes, like yes, I can relate to that. Like I can understand exactly what you're trying to communicate there in terms of the cultivation of this balance between like your connection to this sense of self beyond the fetters of your appearance or of
right,
even your personal story. Like, you know what I mean? Like what is beyond the layers of one's identity, that is so like, yeah, I feel like a lot of times with identity we get attached to the what we can see or know on the surface of things through narrative or through how we appear to others based on those basic things. But when you're doing this deep exploration of your own consciousness, of your own spirit, of your own sense of self beyond those things, and then you connect to those spaces, you realize that these external sort of aspects of our identity are important, but they aren't the whole thing. And if we get too attached to these things, when we are going to almost negate what's beyond that, where I feel the inherent unity of all of us lives. And so this sort of paradox of like connecting to that unified state within yourself and yet everyone else isn't really seeing that in you. They're seeing you as all these labels, and you're trying to communicate beyond those veils. It can be really a frustrating process. And I think sometimes for me in my own personal journey, like I have to show myself a little bit of grace and patience, and realize that like people aren't always going to be open to these ideas in the same way that I've become open to them. And the best thing for me to do, this is what I tell myself, is just to hold the space of that vibration, but you don't have to communicate it. You don't have to force anyone to go there. You don't have to even bring it up, but just in your heart, mind, like that is sort of what you're holding. So even if someone is bitching to you about something, like you can just receive that, but
Right.
receive it at a different vibration, because sometimes that's what people need to do. They need to,
Exactly.
so it's like you can express your positive, peaceful self without having to say a word, like you just feel it in the heart and you hold that space. But it's tricky because I think the impetus toward compassion, toward empathy, that is obviously, if you're on that journey, it's obviously incredibly strong in you. You want to put that into action to help. Like you want to see it, you
Right.
want to
That's
help people.
the
But
initial response is to want to assist and to,
mhm.
but it's not like you can take some sort of like binoculars and give them to the other person.
Exactly. The way that you assist isn't going to be a direct showing to them. It's going to sometimes, and sometimes it is, but I feel like a rule that I try to like keep to myself, like if anyone asks me, I'll go there. But I don't necessarily always bring up these deeper components of what's actually going on in my mind or what I think about, because sometimes people just aren't in the space to receive it, and it could actually
Right.
end up further confusing them, and pushing them away from where you want to go. So like what I like to do is just hold space, and if someone wants to open the door, I'll be right there walking through it with them. But it's
Yeah.
easier said than done. I fumble and fall on my face all the time. But I think it's a beautiful thing what you're expressing here, Stephanie, about this sort of shift in your consciousness, how you're releasing old patterns of thinking or
Right.
behavior, and you're embodying a new resonance within yourself that you're still in the process of discovering its depth. I think the meditative journey is an infinite one. It's a constant state of unfolding, but I can see how it's influencing your work because of the way that even just the soft subtlety of like the color, the iridescent quality that you're painting with is so fabulous. And in the juxtaposition of that, like looking over your shoulder with some of those very earthbound tones, with
Yeah.
this kind of ethereal light
Mm.
quality that you're creating in the work, I think is such an amazing sort of illustration of kind of what we're talking about. This sort of these two spaces that aren't really feel like they can coexist, but you're showing through your work that they can, and express a different level of beauty or nuance to like what the human experience kind of is about. It is messy, it is
Yeah,
imperfect.
that's actually a really good way to put it because almost all of the paintings that I'm creating right now start off with like a very aggressive kind of ground, almost chaotic. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people think that I'm working, they're like, is that rust? Did you burn that? Like, how did you create that? And I didn't know that, I guess, till now that we're talking about it, that it kind of is a commentary on kind of duality and how both things exist. It's like you need the chaos in order to feel the calmness. And I think those two are one and the same. And
Mm-hmm.
they have the illusion of separation, but it's kind of like a circle,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't have one without the other if you cut it
Exactly.
in half. But
Yeah, it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand the something's opposite without like, it's hard to understand something in isolation without its opposite present. That is the nature of this material plane, as far as I can tell, as far as most philosophies and philosophers and spiritual, magical, mystical traditions have pointed to for millennia, is like sort of that is the thumbprint of the human existence, is we have to find a way to engage with the inevitability of duality, that wherever we have one component, we're going to find its opposite. And the problem I think that happens a lot societally is we repress what's the opposite thing,
Right.
unconsciously. And so then it comes out in all these other uncontrollable ways. But I think art is such an amazing method for actually dealing with the duality in a practical way and exploring and understanding it through material, through your hands, through your decision making. And I definitely can see that in the work. And I'm curious, like some of these forms, even like the one over your, I guess would maybe be your left shoulder, the other side, like those lines, they remind me of like wood rings, or they remind me of like sort of some of the kind of like the lines that you might see like on a beach when like the waves recede and pull the sand back in some ways. Like, but they're a part of this rhythmic process, this sort of sense of regularity or harmony that's happening. But then you have that swatch, like you said, like kind of aggressive ground there. I think it's such a beauty, but you can see through it and still can see the continuation of the line, which I find to be such a poignant component. I feel like there is a ground to reality that all the dualistic frameworks are playing on. I think in meditation, in some sense, you're maybe dipping your toes into that reality where it's sort of like this field or this matrix, this ground of that holds all of the contradictions of our experience. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I haven't really been, I would say what maybe my work hasn't been dissected. These are all brand new and no one's really seen them. I'm actually having open studio on Sunday, and I'm always interested to hear what people's perspectives are, and just what their perceptions are of the work too, because um, I think a lot of times it's beautiful to hear people talking about your work because it's almost like they're giving you information about
mhm,
what they are. Because I try so hard not to, I just kind of let them be and kind of let them tell me what they are. Most of the time, obviously, even naming the piece, I try, I feel like by doing so, I kind of maybe make it this thing that it might not be, because it's kind of in a way they're like they're like their own entity, and so
mhm,
um it's really awesome to hear you say everything you're saying, because it's it's just been really lonely.
mhm,
I've had to, because I'm on this path, um I'm trying to find the balance between also making time for people, but I think just kind of understanding, I kind of got into like the idea of like the metaphysical and just like quantum physics, um and the fact that we're just particles, and so then I kind of had this like existential, not necessarily a crisis, but I'm always thinking,
mhm,
and I kind of got to a point where once you start learning about all this stuff, you kind of start diminishing feelings, because you understand that like it's all just a temporary thing, and
mhm,
there's so much more than these deep feelings that you've always attached to. It's like, this hurts me so much, or it's like nothing matters because we're just here momentarily, and like feeling is a gift.
mhm.
And if it hurts, and so it hurts, and if it's cold, and so it's cold, and so, but then you can get to a point where you're so disconnected from having empathy and sympathy, and I feel like that's been a thing in all in itself. It's like learning
Yeah.
about mechanics of the world and what really the world is such a big hologram. It's just, and then you can get to a place where you're just like, well, if nothing matters, I can just meditate all day long, or do this and that. But you have to find balance between, oh, but so and so is getting married and this is really important, or
Mhm.
your sister just had babies, so go and make time for that. And so like it's in those moments that you find the beauty.
Yeah.
It's not in knowing that you're gonna die and nothing matters, or not in knowing that, it's like, in fact, there's grace knowing that like there's an end, quote unquote, in terms of this plane here. But you kind of start, that kind of helps you kind of slow down, and
Mm.
and find beauty in feeling the feelings. And instead of kind of just saying, well, shut up, monkey mind, it's not important. Like, okay, well, the feelings are teaching you something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can take away the importance of it because you're trying to rationalize, like, oh, I can't let this affect me, or for whatever reason. And I'm not if I'm making sense at all,
No,
but
you are 100%. Yes, you are.
um, it's like, and it's like, how do you like paint that? How do you? And so that's why it's so strange what I'm doing now, because they're just like, I'm trying to capture the aspect of like just spirit, or sometimes when I close my eyes, I see this like almost like a purple smoke just kind of floating around, or like a blue, and I haven't figured out how to capture that. But that's kind of where I'm at. Like this, there's this thing
Yeah.
coming out, um,
Hmm.
and so it's like the work, when you look at it, there's so much that went into me getting to that place. It's like having moments where I'm learning about all this stuff, but also learning to turn it off and know that
Yeah.
I'm still human.
Yep.
There's like a huge part of my time when I was just kind of like, well, I don't want to be around people because their thoughts affect mine. Once you start understanding all that, then you realize, oh, okay, you can kind of pick and choose, but at the same time, you kind of lose your human aspect of yourself.
Mm.
You're going to negate someone just because of what they're going through or what. It's like, then you're no longer human. If
Hmm.
you're not having experiences where you're there for somebody else because you all of a sudden understand this thing, it's like everyone's in their own path. And so you could hold space, and you can find that balance between having your spiritual practice, but at the same time knowing that you're human. And that
Yeah.
part where I used to feel like, oh, I want to be this like solitary artist out on a warehouse by the ocean with, just focused on my work. It's it's a romantic concept, but we are humans and we need connection. And if you're creating and you're not having conversations and you're not having interactions, are you even here? Are you even human? Does it even matter?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good question that, that you're kind of contemplating here, is this sort of dynamic between like the big sense of self and the limited sense of self. Because yes, we live in a temporal environment. The impermanence is the mark of existence. What is here will change, will transform into something else in some way, shape, or form over time. It's just part of being alive. But that's to me where the beauty is, as well, is like every moment is just filled with magic and mystery, and like the sense of knowing ultimately what this is. I think is not what the point is. I think the point, like kind of what you're pointing to, is the feeling, the connection, the sense of aliveness that just comes from the awareness that you are. And like to be able to walk that path of like trying to really dive deeper into yourself and discover deeper and deeper layers of who it is you are in relation to this life and what's might be beyond this life. At the same time, like there are practical matters you have to attend to, or you'll wither away like a twig. You got to eat, you got to have
Right.
water, you got to have shelter. But I think you also have to have some sort of community or connection. I think there are certain people that can live that monk life where they do live in solitude. I think it's a very, very small percentage of us. I think that for the vast majority of us, we do need each other on some capacity. But you also, as artists, I feel this way too. Like I need solitude. That's why I, do lots of meditation. And that's why I also paint. Because when I'm in the studio, I can be very just like connected in a new way that the world, it's sometimes harder for me to do. I'm learning how to bring that energy into the
Right.
grocery store, into the way I drive the car, ride the bike, or the way I interact with people. But I think that's really where my practice is the
Right.
integration
Mhm.
of this deeper sense of knowing this, of I don't know how to explain it. The heart, mind, the consciousness, the soul, the spirit, whatever it is that's beyond Martin, what's beyond my life story, what's beyond the trauma I have or the, personal histories I have, because those are important too. I think those are teaching me something about what's beyond it. But
Right.
how do we be in the world but not of the world is sort of the old spiritual idiom. Like, how can you do both? And I think as an artist, you're kind of given an opportunity to be able to do that, maybe a little more easier, in some sense than if you were a Wall Street banker. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because you're given this time to create in isolation, to be able to excavate your individual spiritual signature in the universe. Like, nobody can look out of your eyes. Like, you are the only one who can see that. And so
And
there's a
that's so
gift.
terrifying
There's a
and so
gift.
beautiful at the same time. It's
It
something I always
is.
think about. It's like
Yeah.
nobody, the idea that we're really alone, because I see people as like we're all are kind of like our own planets, right? And so it's like
Mm-hmm.
we all kind of live in our own, and nobody will ever know exactly what it's like to be you ever.
Yeah, not in
Ever.
this lifetime. Not
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 in
as
this lifetime
Stephanie
anyway,
Gonzalez, not with this,
right?
not with your story and all that. But I think the question that I always ask myself, now we're getting really heady spiritually. I love this stuff. The question
Me
that
too.
I
I
always
love this
ask myself
question.
is, and I think it's a question that a lot of various spiritual traditions want, adepts to ask themselves is, who is beyond that, right? Like,
Right.
what is actually looking? Who is actually looking? Is
Mm-hmm.
it Martin? Like, what is that space? And I think the meditative process, in a lot of ways, especially if you're evolving your practice and continue to dive deep. I think there, like anything, there are many layers, and you could find a
Right.
good place to rest. Like, okay, I'm gonna rest here, but like there's always a deeper place you can go. But I think trying to uncover, like, what is that is actually looking out of my eyes? Like, who is that? And I've little tastes and morsels of potential of what that could be, but anytime I've felt like I've had a little glimpse of that, it's been the ultimate unified state. It is without, there is, I guess there is a loneliness, but a lack of loneliness at the exact same time, because it's all one. There is no subject object anymore. And it's only when there's subject object can there be, like we were talking earlier, can there be someone who is alone and someone who is not.
Right.
But when they're unified, it, those things don't exist anymore. It's a whole other
Yeah.
space. I don't know how to describe it. I think people have glimpses of it on deep meditative experiences or big psychedelic openings, lucid dreams. Like, it's a kind of a feeling state that is
Yeah.
beyond
But
the intellect.
well, the thing is, we can argue all day about that happening in that state when you're with yourself meditating alone. While you took psychedelics, I mean, psilocybin's like saved my life, really.
Mm.
But I also have had as many beautiful revelations of love and understanding, deep understanding, by being in the presence of others,
Mm-hmm.
which for the longest time, okay, I went through a period where I just wanted to be alone for some reason, and I just wanted to go inward and meditate, and I was just so tired of the crap of the world, and
Mm-hmm.
all my
It's
struggles and
heavy.
all. Yeah, it's heavy, and then naturally it shifted, and it became to where I started seeking relation, and I started seeking because it's almost like once you reach that level, then the world relays back to you that you are needed in the world, and that you inspire others, or that you and then you that idea of being the solitary artist kind of shifted for me, and it was so strange for that to happen because I was so sure that like that's what I want. And I have like a little vision board where I have this like big warehouse by the ocean that I found on a magazine. And that's, what I've always kind of wanted. But at the same time, something kind of shifted where I started craving friendships and relationships, and um, once I got to that place, it's even in those, it's kind of like that TV show That's So Raven, and that just kind of reveals like, I'm 35, but reveals my age. But when she's all of a sudden in the middle of a conversation and kind of has these like visions or whatever, I kind of have had those experiences without the psychedelic and without all that kind of, stuff,
Yeah.
just being in a moment of love where I mean, that's how the light boxes came to be. I was just sitting at my sister's house on her sofa, and it's always been really hard for me to like sit and watch TV. If I'm watching HGTV, it depends on what it is, but it's hard to kind of get me to sit down. And
Hmm.
I think it was just in a moment of just kind of sitting and doing an activity and just kind of seeing the love in this person's eyes and just seeing how happy they are to just have you spend time with them for whatever
Hmm.
time it is. It's in that moment that I had the revelation. It just kind of came to me. It was like the light box was just kind of like, you're gonna do this and you're gonna do that, and if you do this, this will happen, and you need to, and so it it's beautiful to find that you don't just find peace and you don't just find answers in meditation, that you also find them in being human and having
Yes.
experiences and
Hmm.
presenting yourself to the world and just being of service.
Yes.
And
That's the key word. I feel like right there is the service. Is I
yeah,
think in some ways, and this is just my opinion or perspective, like I think that's kind of what we're all seeking is like the best way that we can serve others, like that where we feel really authentic in the way that we serve through the gifts we have, through the capabilities we have, through the context of our lives. I feel like that's where I feel deeper connections are made is when you're kind of really present for someone else
right.
and there to attend to their needs before your own. And I think that sort of archetype of like divine service to me is always something I come back to trying to center my consciousness on as an embodied person. It's like the practicality of being alive is played out for me in forms of service through being myself, being this individual person, being this artist, making this work. Like I find that making art in a way is a form of service to the world because I think it's even if, whether you like the art or not, just the idea that the role of the artist exists is saying something about humanity, and sort of these don't have any practical things for survival, right? Like I can't eat my painting. I can't, sleep under it. I can't do, maybe you could,
Yeah.
but it's serving another purpose beyond the practicalities of survival. And I think that points to something special about the human condition. And so playing the role as an artist, like you're kind of holding that torch as like a seeker, as an explorer, as a healer, in some sense, depending on who you are, the shaman of some kind. Like you are there to help nurture awakened consciousness in people, even if it's very subtle. You know what I mean? It's like not, it doesn't have to be like a
Absolutely.
slap in the face,
Yeah,
like
no, I
Milarepa, you know?
and I have an example. I mean, I teach these watercolor technique classes, and it's in that giving that service that because I've been doing art full time for about 9 years, and I have to find different ways to survive, right?
Yeah.
So um, in terms of quote unquote surviving and making money, right? I found that these classes are so much more than that, because it's just such a beautiful feeling when you literally just teach someone something, and it's for you, it's the most simple thing because it comes natural to you to create.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know anything else, and you all you know is that if you don't, then you'll die, right? That's true for me. I've
Yeah.
been making things since I can remember. Making uh houses for my dolls out of like cereal boxes and such. But um, providing that space in my art classes here in my studio, um, and just teaching someone something like, say, for example, I taught them a technique and then something fell somewhere and I'm like, oh, that's fine. And I'll just do a thing where they look at you like, wow. And it's like, yeah, you can do that. And there's no right or wrong. Oh, that didn't work. Hey, let me teach you. Thing about watercolors is you can reactivate with water and just kind of dab out whatever with a paper towel. And so it almost kind of feels like you're teaching them these magic tricks. And then at
Yeah.
the day, it's like they're so blown away with what they can do. And you gave them the tools.
Yes.
And it's the best freaking feeling ever, you know,
Hmm.
because it's like you connected with them on a different level.
Yeah.
And in their eyes, you unlocked some sort of door that they thought that they couldn't open.
Hmm. Exactly. So
It's
you're,
almost like you have a set of keys and you're like, this is the one. And they're like, oh, and then they try it. And then they
yep.
also have access. And it's like, they just didn't know that they did have access all along.
Yes, exactly. Like you have to just kind of be the impetus for it, or you have to sometimes just give them the little push, the
Just a
little,
little push.
yeah, little push, and then everything else kind of takes care of itself from that point. I mean, it's a beautiful process to be able to be a part of someone's sort of like burgeoning creative output, like to get them to trust themselves. I think a lot of
Trust,
times,
right.
yeah, a lot of times people just like overthink things, or they
Yeah.
have these stories in their mind that have been given to them about who they are and what they're capable of. And all of those stories are not your own, you know, like someone told you that and you internalized it and latched onto it and identified with it in such a way that you became what they've told you. It's like almost like
Yeah.
the idea of like casting spells, you know, like it's
Right.
literally like sometimes people have done that throughout your childhood by telling you certain things, both good and bad, that ultimately could end up limiting who you are because you believed it. And
Right.
I think once you kind of like take that back and you learn how to dismantle those narratives, those sort of the self-talk, like the ideas of what goes on inside one's own mind, and realize like where these patterns of behavior or thinking came from and that they were never yours to begin with, you start to create such freedom in the mind. And then there's from that freedom and that spaciousness that I feel like the mysterious divine energy of life can move through you and manifest, help you manifest these unique things in the world, be it art or whatever. But I
Right.
think we have to, in some sense, get out of our own way. So, like the service that someone like you provides in that context of teaching watercolor is just you're giving them like a real time example of overcoming a limitation in their mind of what they thought they could do. And then they realize, oh, I can do what I've told myself I couldn't do. And then all of a sudden they remember that next time something similar comes up and they begin to let go of all of the old patterns. And then they become this open, spacious, free being, which I think is what we're all kind of longing for, to be
Right.
fully free, to be who we are in every way. But it's really hard here because
Mhm. It's like you're
there's
planting seeds of knowledge, but and sorry to interrupt you because I feel
no,
like
no, yeah,
it's like by being your most authentic self,
yeah,
you're planting seeds of knowledge without meaning to or trying to. And that's it.
yeah, exactly. You're not in control if those seeds germinate or not. Like,
That's
as
right.
you know, you don't have the control there, but you can plant them. And then I think that's where like us as individuals need to take responsibility and take ownership over our lives to create the right conditions for those good seeds that have been planted in us in our life to sprout.
Right.
And it's hard work. It's hard work to do. I feel like it's really hard, especially in this world that we're living in right now, that is so contentious and so polarized. Sort of how we started talking, you know, when you were sharing about the limitations of how, you know, people saw you in relation to your work, and how it was hard to find your community creatively because you weren't doing what the sort of trend in the art world was asking you to do, or you weren't being that person that they wanted you to be. You were being yourself. And I think that's sort of an uphill battle that we have, is a lot of these structures in place will sometimes manipulate the individual's expression, even on an unconscious level, because we want to fit in or we want to succeed. So we sort of cater to what that is. But I can tell you from what I've seen, not only be doing this podcast, but just being in this world, making this art and paying attention to artists like yourself, that there is a huge community of artists like yourself who are interested in these things, who are making this kind of work, who are, I think this is what's sort of, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, is what's kind of coming. And I think
Right.
it's
Yeah.
sort of almost like what we need. Like identity
What we need.
politics are important, but they're limiting and they're not going to tell us the whole story about what's going on. And so I think the art needs to move beyond the polarized topics of identity and into this exploration of what it is that's the fabric of all of this experience. Like, what is it that holds this world together? And what is it that we can do to, I guess, connect in that space in a real visceral way, like to have the experience of that space. And I think a lot of artists are trying to create work that maybe initiates or ushers in even the tiniest little taste of that experience. And for me, that can be very transformative.
Right. Well, you said it best. I mean, it's been hard for me to have a way to explain what you're saying and why I'm trying to there's just such like need for me to kind of shift away from the narrative, just from narrative itself altogether. I mean, and then when you can also put this in a box and say this is spiritual work, and so there's always going to be something to attach to because how else do you describe something with words
Mm-hmm.
if you can't see it visually? But I think you're right, and it is coming. And I think by finding you, I mean, I feel so honored to even be talking to you right now because
Vice
it's something.
versa, right here. I mean, we're just
I mean,
kindred
it's
spirits. We're like
yeah,
on this path together trying to figure it out. But I think there's something deep within what the questions we're asking and the way we're living
yeah,
that is that needs to be shared.
yeah. I mean, when I saw your work, I was like, there was something about the way that I was creating my work. It all kind of started in the center, and
Mm-hmm.
when I saw your work, I I understood it immediately. It was almost like a language that somebody else was speaking that I also understood, and
Yeah.
I felt like, wow, I immediately followed you and I didn't even know like you were doing the podcast and stuff. And it's been a great thing to listen to while I'm painting actually, because I feel it makes me feel less lonely because I feel like there are other people who also understand something that I also understand, but in their own way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's great talking to you about this kind of stuff because this is the kind of place where I'm at right now, and
Yeah.
it's not something that everybody wants to talk about. Uh,
Exactly. That's why I
yeah,
started this podcast because, like,
yeah,
you know, I could talk my wife's ear off all day about this stuff, but she doesn't want to hear it at some point. It's like, come
yeah.
on, like I could talk about these ideas literally all day. And so I was like looking for some kind of podcast that was sort of talking about these things, but through the lens of art. And maybe there's another one out there, but I was like, man, there's nothing out there. I could talk about this forever. Why don't I just start this thing and
It's great.
just manifest? And it's been awesome. I'm just meeting so many amazing people like yourself. And I think one of the big visions I have is this idea of really creating the sense of a community, a movement, of sort of like a sense that like art is always at the forefront of like kind of what's coming. And I think what we need more than ever is a spiritual revolution, and not necessarily under the lens of religion, even though all religions, in my opinion, get you to the same place
This
if you're
place,
following
yeah.
it authentically and not becoming deceived by the ego of yourself or another who might be leading you. I think everything can be hijacked by the ego. So you have
Right.
to tread lightly and be very thoughtful and be very just discerning, about what you do. But I think that's kind of what we need. We need to like, I feel like the polarization is getting so big that the inevitability of a collapse back to the center is just is it's all the only thing that can happen next in my mind. Is, you know what I mean? They get so
Yeah.
it's like a rubber band, it gets so pulled out to the extreme, and then eventually it's going to give way and psh, snap back
Yeah.
or snap away from that center and then reveal a new space, like a black hole or something.
Oh,
I don't know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And well, I feel like that's kind of what's going to happen in the world too. That's why I try not to kind of attach to things because it's scary, being gay and like there's so much hate in the world. I mean, I had
Yeah.
an experience at the skate park with this like bigger kind of dude who assumed that I had a bad attitude and told me right off, just I've seen you around here and my perception of you is that you have a bad attitude. And I was able to say, hey man, you're wrong. I don't think that you know what it's like to be a girl at the skate park. You're always in someone's way. And all I saw was your son kind of yelling at me. So I didn't know what was going on. And sorry if I came across that way. Like, let's shake on it, man. This is my sanctuary. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
here mean to anyone, but you don't know what it's like to have some dude just yelling at you. I have headphones on. I don't know what you're trying to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
He very quickly kind of, I saw that I started to get emotional and I felt like I made a breakthrough there. But at the same time, I was like, man, like the world needs so much healing because it's just like this
Mm-hmm.
person was so quick to do this. And it was like I could have lost my shit so quickly. But that's when the true practice comes in play. When
Right. Mm-hmm.
I don't want any sort of like, hey, I'm just trying to do what you're trying to do. And I feel like there's so much happening being against because I couldn't tell. I was like, well, are you a homophobe or are you like I just didn't understand his frustration. I was like,
Yeah.
this is something more than what you're showing. I was like, literally, I'm a like I come here and I skate. I know the guys here. I'm a local artist in town. I don't have any animosity towards you. I'm just trying to skate. And I felt like something bigger than me there. I felt like it was my duty to let this person know that maybe I'm not the way he thought and
Yeah.
I what I fixed in his mind that day, but like something inside me just made it to where like I could have had the same attitude he did, like you're in my
Mm-hmm.
place. So that's what happens at the skate park when you're a girl. There's always like guys always and they let you know and they want you to know that you're in their way, but it's like, hey, you're in my way. Like I'm not as you, but I'm also here to skate. And so
Yeah.
why is it always that I'm in your way? And so I kind of told this guy, you don't know what it's like. It's like you guys made it very clear every time that I'm in your way. And so like, I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, and so, we were able to kind of hash it out and, he apologized and I apologized. And I was like, hey, I'm
That's
not trying to.
awesome. That's healing
And
right there.
yeah, and I was like putting my ego aside and not being like, well, you think that you're this and it's the park for everybody. And in a way, I kind of shifted it back to like, hey, your perception's kind of maybe not right. And like, maybe let's talk
Mm-hmm.
like, what is it about? What perception are you talking about? It's
Yeah.
like, I, there are so many times when you're going for a trick and someone else goes and this, what happens is it because I'm a girl that you're treating me differently? I don't understand the dynamic here. And so like, I explained, like this is not what I'm here for. I'm just here. This is my sanctuary. Like I
Yeah.
come here to escape into myself, right? And so that is a true test. I feel like that's when the things come into play. When in meditation, nothing happens to you. You sometimes maybe you cry if you needed that release, but you don't have any conflict. You don't have any.
Mm-hmm.
You're not practicing the things that you're being kind of fed, right? So like through meditation you're kind of being fed like these ideas or whatever it is. Everybody has a different experience,
Yeah.
but it's when you're out in the real world where you actually apply
Exactly.
and that's when you really have to check yourself and say like, oh, okay, well, what perception are you having, like why? And
Mm-hmm.
instead of like trying to meet them in the same place, it's like you've done the work so you can actually take it back and say, hey, no, actually that's not right. And I mean, if they're a complete mean person and they're not going to see past their issues, and that's fine, but that's when beauty happens, when
Yeah.
you can get past something and both of you, and that, like I said, it doesn't always happen, and even then it's like if it doesn't get to that point then you have to let go, and that is
Mm.
another lesson that there's just lessons. It's like everywhere, everything.
Everywhere. Yes. Everything is a teaching if you know how to look at it, if you know how
Yeah.
to like see the teaching in it. But I think what you're saying is so important. And I think it's something everybody deals with, is this sort of the incongruity with one's perception on, especially on someone else. A lot of times what happens is it's really a projection game. Like somebody is projecting their own inner frustration on you because in that moment you're a target for their frustration. And maybe being a woman or being gay is like makes you an easier target for certain type of people. We see that obviously there are very angry people who target people who are different than them, in
Right.
all sorts of ways, because that's an easy screen for them to project their own inner self-hatred or pain. Really, it all comes down, I think everyone has a lot of inner pain that they don't know how to deal with, and so they express themselves aggressively, violently, or in just incredibly rude or mean ways to others because they don't know how to deal with that energy, and they're
Right.
looking for a way to get it out, and they think that's how on an unconscious level they're getting it out, but really they're just creating more damage. So being able to like dismantle him in that moment by just asking that question, or even just posing a sense of a seed of doubt in his mind that he could be wrong about
Right.
you, is
Yeah.
everything. Like I think sometimes that's all you need to do, is just sometimes you sow a little seed of doubt in someone's thinking about something in order for them to open. Because I think back to what you're talking about, like attachment and stuff, I think that's something we naturally do to everything. And so if you can find a way to relinquish a little bit of that grip that someone might have in an idea of something, then it creates at least an opportunity for space to be there for something new to come in. And from that, maybe insight could happen. And it's hard, though. It's hard to tread in the world being sort of, you have to be on guard in some ways too. You have to protect yourself because there are bigoted, mean, violent people out there as well. But
Yeah.
to have the courage to stand up to him and say that, and ultimately create a healing dynamic between the two of you, like that's like reconciliation and as a prime example. And I think that's kind of the kind of energy we need to bring to each other, is a
Right.
sense of like respect, but also curiosity, but not like conceding who we are, not becoming docile, but yet becoming strong and yet open and receptive for a communication to happen. But the problem is we don't see that on the levels of culture or society that is running things. Like you look at the political class, they're some of the most immature people I've ever seen in my life. The way they treat each
Right.
other, the way they talk to each other, even in the media, the way the media bashes the opposite side in both directions. Like they are just literally prime examples of unconscious behavior. And I think people are affected by that negatively. And that's sometimes a symptom of our society too, is we are being taught by the least wise among us. And I think culturally, the question is like, how do we flip that script? How do we get the wise, knowing, loving, compassionate voices to get to the top of these echelons of power? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's what we need more than ever. But it seems like the system's kind of rigged to push those kinds of people out. Because I think somewhere along the way, in my mind, you have to sell your soul a little bit to get to these higher levels of power. And so once you've done
Yeah.
it once, you can do it infinite times.
Well, we'll just give everybody LSD and just
Oh my
and remove
God.
alcohol from the equation, which, alcohol in itself can be ceremonial, like without being abused. Like there are different aspects of yourself that you can access in a state, but I just think, yeah, I mean, it's all being fed through the media and the just
Mm-hmm.
power, all the movies in Hollywood, and it's just it sucks because it is the most emotionally immature people that are leading the country,
Yes,
because of their hunger for power. And it's like, what's the point of it, of this power?
exactly. It's not
You
permanent.
can't, yeah, it's just temporary, and it's all it's ego. And so
Exactly. Yeah,
I think, yeah, the
exactly.
best way to dissolve ego is, I mean, you can't force people to meditate, and you can't force people to take psychedelics. You can't. And so it's like, where do you start? Well, you start with yourself, and it might not feel like a big change, but that's all you can do, and that's all you can control. And
Yeah,
so, and so,
exactly.
yeah, and so just start with self. And
Yeah, you have to be in the driver's seat of some sense of like changing your own consciousness for the better. And the paradox of that is you got to learn to also sit in the back and let
Right.
another energy drive the car too.
Oh yeah, because you can sit
That
at home all day
surrender,
long. Yeah, you can sit at it's like it's like you can't do anything about you can in conversation plant some seeds, but there's no point in kind of attaching to what's happening if you can't there's nothing you can do about it. And so what are you going to do? You're just going to wake up and see all the news and just be, oh, this is what they're doing now, and of course be informed, but at the same time take the back seat and know that that's not your there are things that are not your battle.
Exactly. What you do though, like we
Hi.
were talking earlier, it's like the energy signature that you hold in your heart and your mind and your body does have an impact on the world in a very amazing way. It's just so subtle, or maybe quantum or subquantum. It's like it's all, but on some level, like by being in that vibration of openness, of compassion, compassionate, sort of like loving attitude toward the world, and carrying that in the way you walk in the street, the way you say hi to people, the way you communicate, like that does have an impact. Or putting that energy into the creative act of making something, powerful and beautiful and authentic. It's going to hold some kind of resonance in the world. Wherever that work goes, it's going to emanate, and it's going to impact people in ways that are, like, I think, below the surface of what they might be aware of. And I think that does contribute. I think the world to me is just so mysterious. I just think there are
Yeah.
so many things that we can't fully know. And I think in that state of not knowing is where, for me, like bliss comes from, because it's like surrender, curiosity, and awe, and like just being in awe of the majesty of like every moment, which is easier said than done. But when you practice it, it's just life changing, because, like you said, like you could turn on the news and get into this deep downward spiral of depression because everything feels like it's falling apart and everyone hates each other and the world's coming to an end. Da, da, da. But if you just turn and look out your window and there's a cardinal bird there singing its song, just glistening in the sunlight, like you could behold something so unbelievably miraculous as that and live in
Yeah,
a totally different state. Like, yeah, the right
exactly.
here, right now, the world isn't falling apart. There's
Exactly.
sunlight, there's beauty all around me, and there's beauty inside everyone I see. And I choose to live in a way that tries to see that. I think that has an impact too. And then push comes to shove, you have choices you make in your life. And if you make choices from that consciousness, and more people en masse make choices from that kind of consciousness, that's where the change will come from. It's not going to be a big swooping boom. It's going to be subtle. It's going to percolate underneath the surface,
Right.
just like a plant does before it sprouts through the ground. It's
Yeah.
still, there's a lot of work happening underground that you can't see, but then all of a sudden one day, boom, here's that dandelion. Like there's that flower that just
Hmm.
popped up overnight, like, or that mushroom that just popped out of the ground overnight. But that wasn't an instantaneous process. It was a deeper process. You just weren't aware of how it was working. You're
Yeah,
just seeing kind
absolutely.
of the result. And so that's sort of how I try to like live my life as best as I can. um it's hard. It's like you don't want to check fully out, but you also don't want to
Yeah.
check fully in, because
Hmm.
the fetters and attachments that'll come from that are not going to be healthy. So I think that's what I struggle with, like, is that balance, is how do we balance those things and live in the world in an authentic way. And I think it's a daily practice and a daily readjustment that has to happen.
Yeah, for me, it's required basically just a lot of isolation,
Mm-hmm.
just so much because it's you need to hear your own thoughts and your own. But at the same time, yeah, once you get to that point, you have to kind of come back because you can't just hear yourself all the time, unless,
Yeah.
like you said, you're a monk somewhere. But
Yeah.
um,
I know. That's
especially
why I always,
calling, I feel like you have the calling, and
yeah.
you just kind of follow the path of least resistance and get out of your own way. Exactly what
Yeah.
you said
Let the
earlier.
energy of the world move through you sometimes, the mysterious quality of life. Let it guide you. I always love the archetype of the bodhisattva, and the ideals of that are so fascinating to me. I don't know if you're aware of that archetype, and like especially in Tibetan Buddhism. But it's someone who is either, depending on how you look at it from different perspectives, it's either someone who is delaying their enlightenment on purpose for the sake of helping others, or
Mm,
someone who is achieving their enlightenment so that they can help others. You know what I mean? I think it's a little
yeah,
of both, but it's this idea of like you are deeply working on yourself. And the goal, ultimate goal of that is so that you can be a vessel of service toward all beings and help usher all beings toward the enlightened consciousness. And so for me, like the bodhisattva could be take the form of any kind of person in the world. It
right.
doesn't look like a monk in robes all the time. Actually, most of the times it doesn't. It looks like a normal, random person you would never know is a bodhisattva. But the way that it's all about like that internal energy that they carry with them that has an impact on the actions that they carry out. And so I always have loved that and romanticized that notion of the bodhisattva, and something I always kind of come back to and try my best to see if I can like cultivate that state of consciousness as often as I can. But it's tricky, but I think it's a beautiful idea, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's one of those things where like I feel like that's kind of what's happening to me because it's like you could always go deeper, but it's almost kind of the same idea as like having that duality and you know, stopping your your continuous practice. You can just come home and meditate every day, you know, and just do that and yoga and just stay to yourself. But you do by, you know, it's like you by choosing to also have those like human interactions and all that kind of stuff. It's like in a way you're delaying, but at the same time you're taking what you've learned and applying it to situations so that you can be a teacher uh in a way
Yeah.
without knowing it. And so
Yeah. And even the example of the art that you make, you know, is doing that as well. Like living that lifestyle as an artist, like choosing to live in that way, to like live in the creative space, to make work, to share with others, you know, is a part of that too. And you know, looking at your practice as an artist, like I definitely see you from a imagery component. Like you're exploring these vast spaces. Geometry is a big part of the work that you're doing, but these organic qualities, like I can see the seeking that's happening through the work you're making, and it makes it so human to me. It makes it so real, you know, it makes it so authentic to me. It's not sterile, it has this real human touch to it. And it feels for me like it's kind of opening the space of inquiry in my own mind. Like when I look at it, it's going to create this deep contemplative state. And I think more and more people are getting more and more comfortable looking at abstract work that is not narrative based, that is
right.
not based on anything necessarily recognizable pristinely in the real material world. But like I think in an intuitive level, like we're aware of the energy that's laying beneath all things, the matrix, that all the ground of being, you know, Indra's net, whatever we want to call it. Like there is this sort of mathematical geometric framework from which all of life sprouts. It's this unity space. And I love seeing that in your work because you're pointing to the universality that is geometry. I feel like it does transcend language in some ways, and it does speak to something about the inherent existence of life. Like, you know, that there is some kind of design under here that has rationality and meaning and purpose, and it's holding this whole game together. What is that? You know, what is
Yeah.
that space? That's why for me personally, I'm really interested in like sacred geometry, and interested in like ancient civilizations and our deep ancestors and how their knowledge of these things kind of got lost or misconstrued through time, through the, you know, manipulation of history and all of that. Like I think we in some ways like we're maybe in a time where we're kind of reverting back to some primordial wisdom that we've lost. And I see
Right.
some of that, you know, in a lot of the art that I'm seeing. I think that's what draws people to this kind of work too, is because it's speaking to them on some cellular level or some unconscious level that's very deep. So I really appreciate like kind of the direction your work is going. I think it's an incredibly beautiful direction, and I can't wait to kind of see how it evolves as you start to continue to grow as an individual and as an artist. To see like where you could take it, because I do think that there's something really amazing happening in your studio, and I hope you see that too.
Yeah, hopefully you can visit. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Uh,
this I've been here for about 9 years, but this they're supposed to expand the highway at some point and eventually demolish this place, which was
oh,
happened to basically all my studios in Montrose where I used to live. This has been the longest. This has been my longest relationship. Let's say that the
well,
studio.
you create the space ultimately by
Yeah,
bringing yourself into it the way you do.
yeah, this has been the biggest, and I they just keep getting bigger. I feel like the art just keeps taking over my life, and
It's
so I
amazing.
welcome it. You know, I
Yes, dive deep in there and just continue to do what you're doing. Like, I'm sure other people tell you this, but I'll be another person to tell you, like, you are on the path. You are on the right path with
thanks.
what you're doing, and keep pushing it and keep evolving it, and keep growing personally through it. I feel like that's the greatest gift my art gives me. It's like it's a teacher for me, my art practice. It teaches me all the
Oh,
things
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
are, so many things I learn about myself through the creative act and through my commitment to making art. So continue to let it do that. And I think this conversation we had today was really deep. I didn't realize we were going to just get really deep and personal. And I really appreciate like all the things that you shared, being vulnerable and very open with yourself to all of us. Like that is art in itself. That's what art is. It's like that, a willingness to be vulnerable and open and sharing. And it's just really beautiful, these questions you're having and the insights you're having. And know that I'm a kindred spirit on the same path, trying to figure out the same stuff,
Yeah, and I'm so
So,
thankful for you. I think just seeing your work and seeing what you're doing and the podcast work that you're doing, it's really amazing because it gives people a voice, really.
mhm.
Um, and the way that you describe the work, you have such deep understanding for as you have this gift, it's like you see things in a way that you can describe them, and I not envy you for that, but I find that admire you for that
Yeah,
because
thank
you're
you.
you're the way that you describe the work and the way that you see things. I'm just so grateful that we had this interaction.
Yeah, and more to come. I mean, I'm in New Orleans. I know you're in Houston, and
Yeah,
my brothers live there, so I go to Houston. I'm definitely going to reach out to you. I definitely want to come hang in
yeah.
the
Come
studio,
visit the studio.
skate
You're
around
welcome
a little bit,
anytime. Yep.
bring my skateboard. And same thing if you find yourself in New Orleans, we got to hang out, because I think,
Oh, absolutely.
again, like, uh I'm 37, we're like the same age. And
Mm-hmm.
I think on a similar path in a lot of ways, and have a lot to share. And I think
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
community is important, because we live these lives for however long we're able to live them. And I think we want to be together and impact each other and share and grow and help guide each other
Yeah.
toward the potential we all feel inside of ourselves. And that's why this podcast exists in my mind, is to create a feeling of that in some ways, even though it's all virtual right now,
No, you're
on
doing great
Zoom.
work, and you're really
So,
kind of making me feel as if like I have a community. I might not have it present here, but
yeah.
um, it does make me feel like I have somewhere where I can exist. And I think in this plane that you're creating with all these artists, that you're doing something so much more than you're creating this ripple effect, and you're establishing something for people to feel like they belong, and that is like so important for human beings. And
Yeah.
it's almost like I feel like when I listen to your podcast, I'm like going to church or something, like
Oh God. There's no church here. The church of art,
the church of
the
art. Yeah,
church of
like
sharing minds, like the exchanging of
sharing minds, right?
minds. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's what I care about. And I really appreciate, what you're saying, and in my like deepest intentions, that's what I hope for, is to create that sense of connection, camaraderie, support, community, even if it only exists in this virtual space for now. Like I hope one
Yeah.
day it can exist in the 3D. Like my goal is to be able to connect with all of you all in the material world too. Like not just
Yeah.
be this like apparition on a screen, but like to share space with each other. And who knows how things will evolve. I think we have to always like let go of the control of our future narrative as best as we can, and
Yeah.
and always create a little space for the magic and the mystery to do its thing, you know.
Exactly. Yeah,
And when
let
we,
go of attachment.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
because that's when we things happen that are unexpected, and I think it's sometimes it's the unexpected things that end up making life just so like wow,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, thank you so much for connecting with me today. And I know there's more to come. And everybody out there listening, you have to check out Stephanie's work. I'll have links in the show notes. Stay up with what's going on in her studio. I mean, it's incredible, it's powerful, and it's going to keep evolving. So, keep it up. Awesome. Talk to you soon. All right.
All right.
All right. Peace. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and yeah, excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.